Welcome to the deep dive. So, we're looking at May 2025 and this really dramatic flare-up between India and Pakistan.
That's right, a critical few weeks.
Yeah, and we've gathered quite a bit of material here because it wasn't just, military action. There was this intense information war, a perception battle, and some serious diplomacy going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely. It's a compelling case study in how modern conflicts play out, isn't it? Where the story about the events can be almost as important as the events on the ground.
Okay, so let's get right into it. The spark, as far as we can tell from our sources, seems to be this terrible terrorist attack back on April 22nd, 2025 in Pahalgam, Kashmir.
Yes, very tragic.
26 Hindu pilgrims died. And India pretty quickly pointed the finger at Jaish-e-Mohammed, a group, long linked to Pakistan.
And that attack really provided the pretext or the catalyst, perhaps, for what came next from India. It's worth remembering, I think, that there was already a kind of growing expectation for a tougher Indian line on cross-border terrorism.
Right. And that response materialized on May 7th, Operation Sindoor. And this wasn't small scale. We're talking coordinated missile strikes.
Multiple targets.
Exactly. India said it hit 9 terror camps, specifically in Pakistan-administered territory, places like Bahawalpur, Muzaffarabad, Kotli, Muridke, all reportedly linked to Lashkar and Jaish infrastructure.
Targeting multiple sites like that, it suggests a broader strategic goal, maybe to dismantle a network rather than just hit one spot. Getting training,
logistics. And India was very clear, or tried to be, saying these were precision strikes. Planned carefully, they claimed, to avoid civilian casualties.
But Pakistan's reaction was immediate.
Instantaneous, almost. Condemned it outright as acts of aggression, and they insisted civilian areas had been hit. So right from the get-go, you have these two completely opposing stories.
Precisely. The physical action was immediately mirrored by this fierce fight to define what just happened. This narrative warfare you mentioned. It's all about shaping how people see it, getting support domestically and internationally, controlling the storyline, really.
And Pakistan, it seemed, really jumped on that narrative part fast. They put out footage, held press briefings.
They even claimed to have shot down Indian jets.
Right. It felt very proactive, a quick effort to frame themselves as, the victim of aggression.
Getting your story out first, especially with visuals, can be incredibly powerful in setting the initial tone. It seems they prioritize that speed.
Okay, but here's where it gets interesting. The contrast with India's approach. Some analysis we looked at suggests India kind of stumbled on the narrative front.
A narrative collapse was one term used.
Yeah. Despite claiming military success, the information coming out of India felt slower. And some reports suggest it got caught up in more maybe sensational domestic angles, speculation about toppling the government in Pakistan, things like that.
Which, according to these analyses, didn't play well internationally. It created skepticism.
So it highlights this crucial point, doesn't it? You can have a, let's say, militarily precise operation, but if you don't communicate it effectively on the world stage,
it can be completely undermined, exactly. If there's an information vacuum, or if the information provided isn't seen as credible or timely, other narratives just rush in to fill that space. The lack of sort of prompt briefings, easily accessible counter-evidence, it apparently made it harder for India's account to gain traction outside.
And you saw the effect. Big international outlets, The Telegraph, Sky News, they were reportedly giving quite a bit of airtime to Pakistan's claims, often, it seems, without a strong, immediate Indian counterpoint being presented alongside it.
It really just underlines how vital strategic communication is in these crises. If you don't actively tell your own story to the world, you risk letting your adversary define your actions for you.
So let's unpack Operation Sindoor itself a bit more. We know India said 9 locations linked to cross-border terrorism. And our sources suggest these were proper training facilities, some apparently capable of housing, up to 50 recruits each?
Yeah, so quite significant nodes in that alleged infrastructure. Targeting training centers like that is a clear attempt to degrade future capabilities, right? Disrupting the pipeline. 50 recruits per camp suggests a pretty substantial operation.
And the timing, very early morning, between about 1:05 and 1:30 a.m., that seems deliberate.
Almost certainly tactical. Consistent with the claim of trying to minimize civilian risk, you'd assume. Aiming for a time when the intended targets might be present, but surrounding activity is low.
Now, India's approach here, it seemed different compared to, say, the Balakot strike in 2019. This time, they reportedly released more evidence up front, Satellite images, timing logs, coordinates backed by intelligence.
Yes, there seemed to be a conscious effort to provide more tangible proof points. The stated goal wasn't just retaliation, but to actually expose the network, to make a case.
Which suggests they understood the need to be more transparent, maybe, to build a stronger case internationally.
It would seem so. A shift in strategy, perhaps learning from previous experiences.
But, as we said, that evidence, however compelling they thought it was, seemed to have a limited impact on the main story being told globally. Pakistan's PR efforts just seemed to dominate.
It raises that question, doesn't it? Can even strong evidence make a difference if the communication strategy surrounding it isn't equally robust and crucially timely?
Yeah, that's a really key point. Having the facts isn't enough. You need to get them out there through the right channels, fast, in a way that resonates. And that seems to be where India ran into difficulties.
That appears to be the challenge they faced, yes.
Okay, so fast forward just a few days. May 10th. Suddenly, there's an announcement. A full and immediate ceasefire.
Right. Seemingly brokered quite quickly.
Apparently, after high-level talks with the U.S. involved in mediating, President Trump even tweeted about it, offering again to mediate on Kashmir. And Pope Leo XIV from the Vatican called for peace, too. For a moment, it looked like, okay, de-escalation.
The involvement of figures like that really shows the level of international concern, doesn't it? Any ceasefire is usually seen as a positive step, a chance to stop the fighting and talk.
But that feeling lasted. Well, hours, maybe. Reports of explosions started coming out of Kashmir very quickly.
It unraveled incredibly fast.
And predictably, the blame game started instantly. India said there were infiltration attempts. Pakistan alleged artillery strikes. It was like the ceasefire declaration barely registered on the ground.
It just highlights the deep, deep mistrust there and the volatility. Even with external pressure, those underlying tensions and the tendency to immediately accuse each other just persists. It makes lasting peace so difficult.
And what's fascinating is the domestic picture in both countries. Apparently, both governments were busy telling their own people they'd achieved a victory.
The domestic narrative. Yeah.
Even as the ceasefire was clearly crumbling. Meanwhile, the international community was looking on thinking, this is incredibly fragile.
That's quite common, actually. Presenting a narrative of strength and success at home, even when the situation is, well, ambiguous at best. That gap between internal messaging and external perception is something you see often.
Well, let's shift to the diplomatic fallout. India, seen as a rising global power, but it seemed kind of isolated here. Sources point out it couldn't even manage to delay or block an important IMF loan for Pakistan.
Despite voicing concerns that those funds might indirectly help extremist groups.
Yeah. What does that tell us?
Well, it suggests that while India's influence is growing, its leverage over big international bodies like the IMF isn't absolute, especially when other major players, maybe with different interests, are involved. IMF decisions have multiple factors behind them.
And it wasn't just the IMF. China, Turkey, Azerbaijan, they all reportedly made public statements supporting Pakistan during this.
That signals the complex diplomatic landscape. Like I said, it's cultivated those relationships, and that kind of backing in a crisis is significant diplomatic capital. It shows India's concerns weren't the only ones being heard.
There was also reportedly criticism inside India, some arguing that maybe Operation Sindoor ended too soon, that perhaps extending it could have put more financial pressure on Pakistan, given its reliance on aid.
The argument being the swift ceasefire gave Islamabad breathing room it perhaps wouldn't have had otherwise.
Right.
It's a strategic calculation, though, isn't it? More pressure might have worked, but it also dramatically increases the risk of wider escalation. Unpredictable consequences. A serious trade-off.
And maybe a key diplomatic setback for India, based on our sources, was President Trump's comment about Kashmir mediation right during the ceasefire buzz.
Yes, that resurfaced.
That's a real red flag for India, isn't it?
Yeah.
They've always insisted Kashmir is bilateral. Why is third-party mediation so sensitive?
It goes right to the heart of India's position on sovereignty. They see Kashmir as an internal matter to be resolved only between India and Pakistan. Bringing in outsiders is viewed as, well, unwelcome interference and potentially something that could strengthen Pakistan's hand internationally.
Okay, finally, let's circle back to that perception battle itself. We mentioned Pakistan's proactive media approach pressers, media kits ready to go.
Very outward-facing.
Contrast that with India's approach, which seemed more internally focused. Reports of blocking thousands of Twitter handles, even filing police complaints, FIRs, against journalists.
It's a stark difference in strategy, isn't it? Pakistan aiming to shape global opinion, while India seemed focused on, perhaps, controlling the narrative within India, which raises questions internationally about transparency, about openness during a crisis.
And apparently India's own foreign secretary had to publicly defend free speech even as these actions were being reported. Sources highlighted that as a kind of contradiction.
Potentially damaging perception-wise.
The argument being that this focus on internal control might have actually hurt India's credibility globally. How so?
Well, in today's world, trying to clamp down on information can easily backfire. It can breed suspicion, create the impression you have something to hide. Sometimes, a more open approach, even when things are sensitive, can actually build more long-term trust.
And the ripples went beyond just diplomacy. Reports of Chinese defense stocks actually rising.
Fueled by speculation, yeah. Rumors that Beijing was supplying advanced drones, other weapons, to Pakistan during this period.
And again, India seemed to lack a strong public counter-narrative to address those rumors effectively. What does that suggest about the wider geopolitics?
It shows how these regional flare-ups tap into bigger geopolitical currents, doesn't it? The idea of closer China-Pakistan military ties obviously worries India, potentially shifts the regional balance. If India isn't actively countering those narratives, the speculation can gain momentum and influence how the region's security is viewed globally.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, it really makes you ask, what does victory even mean in a conflict like this today? India launched the military strikes, claimed precision.
But Pakistan arguably scored points in the microphone war, as some called it.
Right. And that ceasefire they announced clearly fractured almost immediately.
It really underlines this evolution in conflict. Shaping the narrative, winning hearts and minds, it's becoming just as critical, maybe sometimes more critical, than traditional military results. The definition of success is getting much more complex.
And it leaves you thinking, these conflicts aren't just fought with missiles and troops anymore, are they? Media narratives, the sheer speed of information, public opinion, these are all battlegrounds now. It really makes you consider the implications of that shift, how conflicts are fought, and how we even understand them in the 21st century.